Everybody talks about in computing world the Moore's law, which is every 18 months you double the performance and half the cost. But what people may or may not realize, the cost of biology has actually dropped faster than the Moore's law.
Hola, Karl. ¿Cómo estás?
Que sopa, Erum. I'm actually recording this podcast from Panama City, Panama.
Yeah.
So I'm south of where I normally am, and I came down here to visit my mom and dad. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm trying to hold it down here in Brooklyn while you're enjoying the wonderful weather and beauty of Panama. We're doing okay, but we miss you.
Yeah, so today was the first day of school in Panama City, so the roads were crazy. But it's summer down here, and the weather has just been very, very hot. And since I hadn't been here in a while, I took my mom and dad on a couple drives, and we went to go see these new locks, or relatively new locks, that are the way that ships move through the canal. And the canal has been in the news lately, first because of our president, and second because BlackRock ended up buying the company that manages the canal. So always impressive to see how it works, and impressive to see the amount of growth in Panama City. There's construction going on everywhere. The highways are in really great shape. What's going on with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, things are going well. It's been a very interesting weekend for me. I got a massage by a robot for the first time.
Crazy.
It was crazy. It was amazing. There were points where I was afraid that it would crush me, but it did not. It was great because full control over your experience, whether you want a more firm experience or you want it to let up just a little bit. If it gets too intense, you can just go boop, boop, press the buttons, and it makes it a really nice experience. There's music, there's beautiful vistas you can look at in terms of there's a screen when you're facing down on the massage table. There's a screen that has all the controls, and you can look at a snowy mountaintop or a rainforest. And then there's beautiful sounds in the background, which I hear in your background. I hear some birds. That's all natural, not simulated.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a great weekend, relaxing, but it was also International Women's Day. That's been really great. You get some time to pause and just think of how much progress we made as a gender. And I can't believe I'm saying that, but just to acknowledge that we have this feminine energy and we're working, we're doing things, we're caring for people, and just appreciate the women in our world. And there were a few events here and there in Brooklyn that brought together female founders and entrepreneurs. And it's interesting because you know me, Karl, I kind of feel two ways about events that are just women only or cater to women.
Yeah.
Because on one side, I'm like, well, we should have men in this conversation to understand some of the specific nuance of what are the challenges for women in the workplace. At the same time, it is good just to have all women because there are certain things that some women might not feel comfortable talking about in front of men. So this event was strictly women, and it was in the most Brooklyn place. It was in the old Domino Sugar Factory, which got converted into co-working space. And then this co-working space had a yurt inside. We call it the tea tent. And so we went inside this tent, and there was about 20 women that either exited a company or starting a company. People were very open. We were sipping on some tea. We were talking about our experiences. It was guided, so people asked questions about where are you in your life? Are you transitioning away from a career to a new project? What is that like for you? What are some challenges? And people really opened up. I just think the environment, the space enabled it. People were crying, just trying to be open. And I'm one of those people that if I see someone crying, I get teared up. It's like that automatic reflex. I'm an emotional person. But it was therapeutic. It was like an instant connection with 20 women. After that, we all went on LinkedIn and went, do. We're all connected to each other now. And it was great.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it kind of hit me. We were driving back from this lake. It's called Bayano Lake, which is heading towards the east of Panama, towards the Darien Gap. And on the way back, we stopped at this little tiny restaurant on top of a hill, kind of had a view of the lake. The women there that were running it were in a really good mood. And I was like, oh, you guys are in a super good mood. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's International Women's Day. Mm-hmm. And so then I congratulated them. They congratulated my mom. They were just super happy. It was just like a reminder. And for me, it's a good reminder because we got a long way to go. I hate to say it.
Yeah,
but
true.
We do have work to do when it comes to just equality. And we've seen this anti-DEI thing going on, which is just striking. And I just see it as being a big distraction because the train has already left the station and you're not going to be able to roll things back, I think.
Yeah.
But it was so nice, unexpected reminder in the middle of nowhere. that it was International Women's Day.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of unconscious bias, even among women towards women. Our society isn't quite there yet in terms of true equality. And when you're hiring someone, being able to look at a woman and a man equally, we're not there yet as a society in the United States. But hopefully we get there. I mean, we're very positive here on the Grow Everything podcast, and we do what we can. So yeah, that's been a good thing. Another great event that I went to recently was the Merck Digital Sciences Studio had an open house where the founders went to Merck's campus in New Jersey and met with the employees at the company and were sharing all of their innovation. It's just amazing to see all of these companies that are supporting the drug design and development and clinical side of pharma and really trying to make drugs safer, more effective, getting them to market faster through a more innovative operations, more efficient operations. And to see it in one eye shot at an event where these 13 companies presenting and presented in a way that was from the earliest stages of drug development to the clinical stage, it's refreshing. I'm sure people at Merck were like, wow, this is great to see.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we always say that the big companies, incumbents, they're operating, they're just grinding away at their strategy. They don't have as much room to be innovative as some smaller companies that are coming out of university or coming from software into drug design or drug development and having a fresh perspective on different operations. And the flip side for these companies to understand how to navigate pharma, how are these big companies set up to be able to receive innovation, to be able to contemplate how innovation can be incorporated into their operations. And that is the holy grail for startups to be able to work with larger companies. They need to know what to do. What do they talk about? Who do they speak to? What are the steps? You can't fire hose information at someone at a company that's been there for 30 years and expect them to cut a deal in like 5 minutes of talking to you, right? That's just impossible. But there is a method behind the madness between innovators and entrepreneurs and big companies. And it was wonderful to see that in a very specific aspect of biology. And biology is so vast in our world, but it was great to see that on the biopharma side.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about this a fair amount, but the big companies are desperate for innovation and they're desperate to know what is happening out in the world of innovators. But again, they have very specific ways of bringing innovation and innovative companies in. And there's many different programs to do that. Mm-hmm. And we are lucky to sit at that intersection too and service both the innovators and the earlier stage companies, as well as the big companies that are looking for those innovations. So this sounds like a great event.
Oh, yeah. The challenge between the two, they want to know about the innovation. So the big companies want to know about the new innovation, but it doesn't stop there. Yeah, they want to know how the technology works and what's fresh about it. Then they want to know how would it integrate in their operations. And they want to know how does it make money? And they really want the person with the innovation to come up with the entire plan. They can, of course, change different levers, but you need to present the levers and know this is how we're going to work together to get to market. This is my hypothesis on how this would happen. They then give them that whole plan and then allow them to be like, oh, actually, part of it we outsource. So you need to talk to our supplier, not us, and we can make that connection. But they need the plan to go to a big company and say, I made this. And now what? They're going to be like, I don't know. But if you go to them like, I have this, and this is how much it's going to cost you. This is how much it's going to cost me. This is how much money we stand to make. And this is how we're going to roll out. Does this sound okay to you? And the fact that you thought that far ahead and have the plan, it's a refreshing thing for big companies to be like, okay, you can rap with us. You totally get that we're a business and not an accelerator program.
Yeah. So also in the Grow Everything podcast universe, we actually just did an interview with Dan of the Homeworld Collective on their Climate Biotech podcast. And we will share that information with the interview as it's available, because I think it was a really great interview. I think we did a great job, to be modest.
Yeah. I mean, the Climate Biotech podcast, we're buddies with them. We've been buddies with Homeworld for quite some time. We co-hosted events with them here in Brooklyn. They're based in Boston. We haven't done an event in Boston, but I'm sure they have no shortage of other sponsors up there for biotech events. But yeah, that was cool because the Climate Biotech podcast, it's filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah, no, it was different for us because they
Yeah.
had like 15 people who were on the line. There was live comments. We were answering people's questions.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some people who we knew really well already there. So that made it a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think it was a super great interview. I was really glad we did it. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to having them on again and vice versa.
Yeah. It's a great partnership there. But yeah, it was cool because when we first hopped on the call with Dan, he was a bit frazzled. And I was like, hey, what's up? What he did was he took his 23andMe raw genetic information, raw data, and he put it into ChatGPT's deep research, which is the paid service where they really look at data in a very deep way. I mean, obviously deep research, okay. And then he said that it returned a 50-page analysis of his genetic information. And he was floored by what some of these insights were, where it talked about how he approaches his problem solving and consuming information, and that he has executive functioning to do certain aspects of work, but he looks at information in a different way. And I don't want to reveal his PHI's personal health information, but, but he was just shocked by what the results were revealing about him just by him uploading his genetic raw data. Wow.
And so you were inspired and you're going to do the same thing, right?
Before he even told me that, I already had started an effort because me and primary care physicians, like I just haven't found the one. And
yeah, it's hard.
It's really hard. And I think I found the one, but they're not available. There's no appointment until like 6 months from now. And, you know, I live in New York City. So yeah, that's the challenge because we have a high population. So the good doctors don't have much time. But I was like, all right, let me take some of my healthcare into my own hands because I don't have any core debilitating disease, knock on wood. I mean, but anyway, so I'm like, let me go to Quest Diagnostics, order some tests, get my blood work done, and at least get that data. So I did that. I got my data and I uploaded that into Perplexity to start that conversation because you do get, I think, one free deep research analysis per month at this time in our world.
Okay.
I didn't do it yet. First, I primed it with just a free account. And I was like, look, this is the results of my blood tests. Here's who I am. Ask me any more questions that you need to be able to assess my health and what I need to do in order to live a long, healthy life. And it read my tests and it told me, based on your family history, based on this, here's what you need to do. Here are some things to eat. Here's a recipe for a smoothie to get you to that nice place. And I was like, oh, excuse me. And then I'm like, should I upload my Oura Ring data? It was like, tell me you can't connect it to me right now, but you can connect it to your Apple Health and export a report. And I was like, ooh, interesting. So I also had done 23andMe in the early days. So I had to dust off my login and I went into 23andMe and requested my raw data, which you can't just go download it. You have to request it and it takes a few days. So when I get that, I'll upload that and then do my deep research and I'll report back and see what it says. But I will say though, once you do something like that, it does kickstart and remind you, okay, yeah, I do need to take some more flaxseed oil. I need some more omega-3s. And I did go for a run right after that. As soon as I saw it, like, how much exercise are you getting? And I do pretty well, but I know it could ramp it up. You do really good. I know you're always at the gym and exercising, but I think that feedback loop when you're starting to see, okay, this is information about me and it's not the best. I do need to have good cholesterol, less bad cholesterol in my diet. You know, just from my family history, I'll give you guys that PHI. Don't go spreading that around. But yeah, so, okay, it was great. But the next level up would be to get your whole genome sequenced and then use the deep research and see. And the thing is like, I'm not just doing this and saying I'm not going to go to a doctor. What I want to do, and I hope this new doctor that I'm going to go to in a few months, I hope that they embrace the fact that I did this. And I'm going to not just like send 60-page document to this doctor who has no time for that much time.
Yeah.
I'll get some highlights.
You just want to go into the summary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, here are my 5 bullet
see
points.
What they say. Yeah.
Yep. And then I'm like, what can I do? And then I know that there are a few dual use drugs or drugs that might be used to treat a certain disease, but they can also be used for longevity.
Like metformin. Yeah.
Like metformin. Yeah. And see, would that be something that'd be appropriate for me? If it is, if it's not, this is what the information says. I don't want to just take something just to take something because I heard it. Medicine has to be personalized. And this is a great stepping stone to help the doctor personalize a program for you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I get my blood work done every 6 months. And I often request different things when I go and get it done. Mm-hmm. And now I'm super curious to go in because my cholesterol has gotten higher, but I have been taking metformin and I know the kinds of results that I get depending on what kinds of workouts I'm doing. But it would be interesting to do exactly this, put it into the deep research and see what feedback we get from it. So if you're a regular listener of the Grow Everything podcast, you'll know that back at the beginning of 2024, we said we were going to really focus the year on biomanufacturing. And it turns out that the last couple episodes have been biomanufacturing heavy. And that's because our belief is that biology isn't just a tool for making drugs. We know that. That's what this podcast is about. It's about all the other ways you can use biology. But it turns out that biology is an infrastructure layer that's going to make it possible to make new materials. It redefines manufacturing. It will redefine computing. And people say software is eating the world. Well, we say biology is going to eat supply chains and really replace those petrochemical-based inputs, this need for rare earth elements and inefficient chemical synthesis because biology is nanotech that works at the atomic level.
What do you mean biology will eat supply chains?
What I mean is that supply chains that depend on far-flung chemicals or materials being brought from a distance can actually be manufactured locally using biology because biology is basically abundant everywhere. I'm glad you asked that question. We have heard Jason Kelly of Ginkgo Bioworks talk about Ginkgo being kind of like the AWS of biotech, but we do see biomanufacturing as infrastructure for the biotech industry and for growing the bioeconomy. And so today our interview is with someone who is helping startups grow through biomanufacturing after they've made it to a certain level and they want to start talking about scaling up manufacturing. Veronica Breckenridge of First Bight Capital and also of the BioWell, she and her team are focused on that. So we're really excited to have her come on the podcast. Erum, do you remember how we met, Veronica?
We met Veronica through an introduction by Noah Hellman of iMicrobes. And so we had Noah on and we were talking about all the different players in biomanufacturing and there needs to be a way to create this ecosystem. And when we talked about ecosystem building, the first thing that came to Noah's mind was Veronica. And he's like, you have to talk to her. And here we are.
Yeah. All right. So let's let Veronica take it away and then we'll come back with some comments after the interview. All right, Veronica Breckenridge of BioWell and First Bight Ventures. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So in talking and in seeing you around in some of your quotes, you've said that the biggest innovations of the century, meaning the 21st century, are going to be at this intersection of biology and technology. And that view really reminded us of what Steve Jobs said. Can you elaborate for us what that convergence means to you and why is now the time for that?
Absolutely. And certainly because I'm from Apple, I have to say that is where it originally came from. And because I heard Steve actually saying that. And when I heard that, I have to say this was probably early, I think 2009, 2010, a couple years before he passed away. I didn't really fully understand it. It wasn't until later on, I would say, in my career, as I see the convergence happening, it really dawned on me this is probably the most massive opportunity. The way I would like to think about it is to think about using the example of the printing press versus the computer. We are really at the cusp of unlocking biology, which is really Mother Nature's magic in creating all of us, including and this world, and how to make it better in the sense of how can we make our species. We have today lots of challenges, especially health, nutrition, disease, and we just experienced COVID. All of these things are created by nature, and we have chemicals, microplastics, and these issues that now is endangering our species' survival. If we were able to unlock biology to its core and use the power of nature to recreate our physical environment, this is going to be making us to live on this planet much longer. So that's the outside of the opportunity. And when you think about what has happened in the last decades. One is the science of biology has really, really accelerated from really 1950 when we first discovered the genome and now to early 2000 when it cost hundreds of millions of dollars to sequence a single genome to today where we are able to sequence them for $100. That drop, the cost of sequencing that genome dropped 1 million times. And when you look at the computing technology, how computing has developed AI and a lot of these tools, they've accelerated the development cycle as well. So it's not only the cost has come down, but also we've gone from taking months to sequence the genome to minutes. It's so massive. Everybody talks about in computing world, the Moore's law, which is every 18 months, you double the performance and half the cost. And the last 20, 30 years, we have seen that being driven by the massive transformation the computing industry has gone through because it has followed Moore's law. But what people may or may not realize, the cost of biology has actually dropped faster than the Moore's law. And then when you look back, the other thing that I love to tell, Doug Cameron, I think a lot of people probably in this space know him, talks about how scientists believe there are over 1 trillion microbes in this world. And up to date, we probably really only manage something like 10 to 15 of them well. The opportunity set that's out there for us to unlock is tremendous. I like to make the analogy of the printing press versus the computing. It is a massive disruptional and just transformational opportunity if we were able to unlock it to make the world so much better. And technology is helping us to drive the cost and the discovery cycle down to a point. If it continues as it continues this pace, we're going to be discovering things that we had never understood. And we're beginning to already understand things a lot better. And through that discovery, if you look at human history, we're going to bring so much more, making it so much better for us.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that. I mean, spoken like a true tech and biotech leader, it's always good to have that perspective, and you shared some new insights and new ways of explaining the history and the acceleration of technology that I have never heard before. And it's always good to remind our audience that, I mean, obviously it's going to get better, but at the best time to really leverage technology in a way that's more democratized because it's more affordable. And it sounds like this perspective comes from your incredible background. You said you worked at Apple and you were able to hear Steve Jobs talk about this intersection between biology and technology being the biggest innovation of our century. And you worked in a variety of deep tech fields beyond mobile phones and smartphones. You worked with electric vehicles. Now you're here in biomanufacturing, venture capital, and accelerating these companies. How have these experiences shaped your vision for BioWell and First Bites and your investments at First Bight?
Yeah, so when you look at my career, I think part of it is because I come from an academic family. So I have this insatiable curiosity for real, true innovation that brings massive transformation. I was involved in early days in academic. I was in semiconductor, and part of my dissertation was on optimization of fab production scheduling in semiconductor fabs. So the whole semiconductor industry obviously enabled the computing industry to develop. I was at McKinsey, and then when I left McKinsey for Motorola, really was this passion for also real tangible results. So I love transformational things. I like to see them in action and getting it action, making it happen, be part of that. That gets me excited. So when I left Motorola, joined Apple, it was because I see Motorola wasn't able to continue to bring next level of innovation to mobile device. And Apple was actually at that cusp. It was before the phone days, but it was at the cusp of actually doing something very innovative. When I joined Tesla, I remember the first time that was actually during my interview, I sat in a Tesla Model S. And that was a moment I really realized how revolutionary this product is and how this mode of transportation could transform the world. So that is, I definitely think my drive or passion is about huge transformational things that brings incredible benefits to humanity. And I really believe now biology, especially industrial biology, is that thing that's going to transform our physical world. I constantly talk about how I believe industrial biology will transform our physical world, just like computing changed or created this digital world. The second thing is, I think as an industrial engineer by training, I guess I love process-oriented stuff and efficiency. To me, making things efficiently run and driving things to get to results are very, very important. When you look at whether it's Apple, Tesla, or Motorola, all of these companies I worked for had incredibly sophisticated and complex supply chain and had to do manufacturing. So they all had physical, tangible product that they have to deliver, and they had to scale that operation to massive scale. And that is something that both I studied and also I find that's something that drives my passion. So when I found industrial biology and saw the challenge of commercializing, because this is one of the spaces that we've had very few success, lots of failures, where I immediately recognized the issues of why we had failed, which a lot of it, some of it is cost driven and commercial, but a lot of it is about scaling and making that process and that ultimate product actually cost effective so you can actually get consumer to adopt it. Because consumer understands the benefit. If we can have every chemical that we use today be biologically produced and non-toxic, everyone would use it, but they won't use it if it's 10 times more expensive. So if we can solve the cost parity issue and say, for a consumer, they don't have to change anything. They use the exact same thing, but everything is less toxic and much better for us as human beings. Guess what? Everyone is going to switch. That is going to be the inflection point. And driving to get to that is one of the most important things, and that's all around process efficiency, manufacturing efficiency, and make that commercialization. And that happens to be something that both I studied, but also something I find myself to be very passionate about.
Hi, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Messaging Lab, the force multiplier for biotech. Your biotech company is making the world a better place. You know that, we know that. But does the world? There's a big reason why some biotech companies attract investors, sign up customers, and get attention. That reason is strategic communications. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling narratives. And we have done that for the most successful biotech companies across healthcare, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice, visit messaginglab.com to explore how we can elevate your story and grow your business.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking our language, Veronica. Scale up and cost parity, the ability to get people to understand how disruptive this is and is going to be are all things that we think about, talk about all the time. I find it super interesting that you did your thesis on semiconductor fab. And this is not in our questions because one of the things that we talk about is how quantum computing may change biology. But then I also say that biology is going to change the way chips are designed and manufactured as well, because the amount of information that biology has is more than current chip designs are able to handle. Am I right? I mean, you're nodding your head. You must be thinking something.
No, I agree. I mean, if you think about how much DNA and term information that can be stored in DNA, I know that we're already studying it. Because if the Moore's law is supposed to continue physically right now, it's almost impossible to continue the Moore's law for much longer. Because we can't reduce basically the spaces between much more before the electrons are going to have too much interference between them. So a different architecture of doing it to build the chips in a fundamentally different way could be the architecture that's going to lead to continuing that curve for computing. So I'm not a quantum computing expert, but I feel biology on that front could really unlock something that's just from a paradigm shift for computing.
Yeah.
So to talk a little bit more about BioWell and your investments at First Bight, you really are looking to invest in biomanufacturing. And one of BioWell's key missions is to help startups across the notorious valley of death between innovation and commercialization. And when we spoke with you beforehand, you have a great thesis. I'm really excited to have you on because this is where we need to dig. We're talking about cost parity, process efficiency, your background. It's like the perfect conversation. But can you share some standout strategies that BioWell employs to support these early stage synthetic biology companies?
Yeah. So in fact, we created, like everybody else, acronym. It's not the easiest acronym. We call it IRBA. So it's Industry, Research, and Business Acceleration. What it means really, we think there are three core areas in terms of scaling from a lab to actual manufacturing that a lot of these companies are missing. The first one is actually industry engagement. So working with actual manufacturers actual product providers who have a keen sense of where the applications exist and what cost structure that they can understand, and also the manufacturing and supply chain early on. This is one of the things as an industrial engineer I studied in the 80s, where the Japanese came out, and then Sloan actually Foundation developed this whole book called Machine That Changed the World that talks about how Toyota essentially revolutionized industrialization in terms of continuous process improvement to make manufacturing more efficient. And one of the ways they did it is called design for manufacturability, which is making sure when you're in the lab, you understand the constraints. When you're building that prototype, you understand the manufacturing constraints. And the founders are scientists. They have never even worked in a manufacturing environment, never seen one. So having industry players who have that supply chain perspective, have manufacturing talent and understanding to work with scientists at an early stage in terms of vetting or guiding the development of that science to make sure that it is going to be actually manufacturable, so we call it manufacturability, is critical. So that is one of the areas, and understanding there is a market. So one of the things we do is bring these strategic corporates who are willing to help and to mentor for these companies and guide them through their commercialization path and provide that guidance. So they're not developing something that's in vacuum, that works in a lab very well, will never work in a manufacturing environment. The second dimension we are bringing to life now is the research and pilot facility. One of the key challenges for most of these companies is, unfortunately, this is manufacturing and it does require process validation. It's hundreds of millions of dollars that you're going to put in a plant. But nobody's going to put that much into this technology until it is proven somewhat and de-risked. When you're just in the lab in a large scale, nobody's going to just trust that it's going to work. So a pilot facility and a pilot production with sufficient hours of process actually to validate that you can also, as a commercial product, you need to get to specific range of specification that you can consistently hit. Your manufacturing process needs to be consistent for quality control and to be a commercial product. And to have that, you need a pilot facility and you need to be able to run ideally 1,000 hours, according to the industrial engineering, certainly principles, that you have collected enough data around that process. You can validate the process is stable and is consistent. You can optimize it as well. So from that perspective, that is an expensive CapEx investment for most startups. After that phase, they'll go to commercial and they don't actually need that facility anymore. So for all of the startup, as they go through scaling, if everyone has to invest to build something like that, that is significant risk for investors, but also significant waste that we're creating. Because after they're done, basically, there is no value for that pilot facility. So one of the things we're creating is a pilot facility for a common pilot facility that allows us to house these startups so they can lease the facility, have access to these expensive equipments, and test out their process at that scale, do the validation they need, and then they move on. Then we can have the new startups use that. So it becomes a lot more capital efficient for these startups as they overcome this scaling issue. Instead of putting tens of millions to build that pilot facility, they can rent it for much more reduced, probably 10 order of magnitude cheaper to actually do that. The last thing that we talk about is the business acceleration. In this case, it's not the traditional venture. If you hear the business sector, we really specifically tailor our program to how do we teach, if you will, a scientific founder to become a business leader. So they have their specific areas that they're not very good at. They're great at science, but there's so many other things about business that they don't understand, like how to tell a story, how to engage investors, how to build a team. How do you engage with corporates? How do you sell? Those are specific skills. And even fundraising, where do you get the funding? They are very good at getting grants, but how do you talk to investors? We specifically tailored our program around those type of skills to help these scientific founders and help them to become business leaders.
I love that so much, Veronica. And I feel like we've been super lucky because you're falling into this series of, we had Doug Friedman of Biomade talk about public-private and what they're doing. We had Massimo Portencosa talk about Arsenala and like their model for doing industrialization of biology in the lab, but also thinking for the process. And then you guys also modeling that same thing. And I just see these synergies between all of you that I think are super interesting. But what no one has really talked about is this idea of how do you turn scientists into business leaders? I mean, I think so much of it is learning as you go along. So I really super appreciate you being on here with us now and then also just telling us that story. Now, you guys are based in Houston, and Houston is one of these places that has this incredible chemical engineering ecosystem. And there's all this processing, manufacturing facilities. How does that influence what you guys are doing at BioWell? How does it influence your strategy? And what are some of the opportunities that brings to earlier stage companies?
Yeah. So one of the things that I identified earlier on, I have to say, and I think people in the space understand, this is really to commercialize a product. It's really a multidisciplinary effort and requires cross-discipline sort of talent. And one of the areas is, even though we keep talking about is biotech, the commercialization step, part of it involves lots of chemical engineers and chemical engineering and process engineering. And that's one of the things that Houston is really interesting. It has a traditional strength in chemical engineers. But by the way, Houston actually has the largest medical center in the world. It sees 10 million patients. Texas Medical Center is one of the largest, and they train a lot of biologists. So in Houston, one of the very unique things where you have the raw talent of biology and chemistry and chemical engineers and process engineer and manufacturing working together, you could bring that together. It's like hardware and software. You need both, because if you only develop the software, eventually you're going to be limited by the hardware capability in terms of how fast you can run that software. And biology and chemistry and these other disciplines, in a way, they really work like that. They need to work in parallel and in unison to make eventually biology and biomanufacturing work. Houston has the basic disciplines and these different type of talents that already exist. If we were able to make them connect, understanding the need of biomanufacturing, I think Houston has, from talent base, probably the easiest to approach both sides to come in and support this. The other nice thing about Texas and Houston in general is obviously cost of living, workforce, transportation, logistic from a supply chain perspective. So there are just lots of other aspects that makes Houston also a good spot for pilot or even eventually some commercial manufacturing capabilities here because the infrastructure that exists here. The other thing we talked about is it needs to be cost parity. Obviously, Texas in general, not just Houston, has lots of land and the cost of labor and everything is much cheaper. It's much less regulated, so you can actually stand up a facility. And one of the more successful companies in the space, Solugen, they basically stand up their pilot facility in 11 months. So that's the speed we need to execute in order to accelerate this as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've really thought this through. I feel like throughout our podcast, we've been hearing pieces of solutions required to scale up biomanufacturing and getting all the ducks in a row, but you're doing it. And it's so exciting to hear. It's very refreshing. And it's almost like a plug and play model. You have an idea, come to BioWell, we'll be able to help you get through it. So you also, from First Bight, invested in our previous guest companies. So we've interviewed Moji Karimi of Semvita and Noah Hellman of Industrial Microbes. And you've also put together a broad range of partnerships like Goodyear, Insperity. So it'd be great to just hear a little bit more about how these collaborations strengthen the biomanufacturing ecosystem and drive commercial success for your portfolio companies. If you can give us an example of one to ground this concept in, that'd be really helpful, whether it's one that you invested in or another company that you've seen that has pulled this off.
Yeah, so like I said, one of the key things is actually bringing them together because you have one of the earlier days, I remember having this conversation with a particular corporate, and I love the perspective. A lot of the big corporations understand exactly what they're good at. They actually said, we're good at manufacturing and development. We're not good at innovation. And the startups, that's what they're good at. The scientists are good at innovation. This is why they need to work together. One of the reasons we created BioWell was that we need a sandbox, because for the innovation to actually get adopted by a corporation, it's a long process. This is why a lot of innovation actually dies within companies. And I've told you the story. One of the things when I was at Motorola, I actually was the one that found the client server voice technology at Stanford Research Institute, brought it to Motorola. We end up doing a prototype of it on the mobile device. It worked really well, but in the end, Motorola decided not to move forward with it because we had no operating system to actually implement it. It was basically either Nokia Symbian or Windows Mobile. And the product manager who worked with me, who developed that prototype, ended up leaving Motorola and taking that technology, essentially became a EIR, raised money, and it became Siri, and it was then bought by Apple. We've heard so many stories like this. Even Apple's graphic user interface and mouse, they were actually developed by Xerox. You hear stories like this all the time in the industry, how an incumbent, for whatever they're good at, even Kodak is another good example. They developed the digital technology. It's a digital camera technology, but eventually digital camera technology killed Kodak. They're very good at doing the same thing and improving it because there's so much CapEx that's already invested. So now as they look for incremental returns, they're just looking at how to leverage their existing CapEx to generate more margin. They don't want to put in new investment to do new processes. So they're really not very good at innovation. And this requires like scientists and to be unencumbered by all those perspectives, but with a good understanding of once something works, they could scale it. So that's why we developed this sandbox program to really help these startups and to allow the companies to have mentors, but without really, it's not going to be inside the company, because inside the company, the innovation is just going to get killed. To allow these innovators to work outside of the company, but leveraging some of the expertise and people there and help them to build their innovation and grow their innovation here in BioWell.
Got it. Yeah. I think it's super interesting, and you're right, because we see both sides of it, of course. We talk to innovators all the time. We see the challenges that they face when it comes to scaling. And then we talk to big companies who they're looking for the innovation, but like you said, they're more interested in the transformational technology that they can just plug and play. They're not necessarily interested in going through the process of scaling it up and really incorporating it into their existing processes. Now, you were referred to us by Noah Hellman of Industrial Microbes, who has spoken very highly about your work, and I've known Noah for a very long time. How has mentorship and collaboration influenced your journey and the development of what you guys are doing at BioWell and also at First Bight?
When I first started really getting excited about industrial biology, this was 2021. It was more just the fact that I saw how we talked about how biology could really, I felt this is a moment in time that biology finally we got the cost to a point where we could unlock the power of biology for many things, but they just needed to scale. And over the last 3 years, as I set up the fund, start working with these scientific founders and companies, it's really helped me to, I would say, refine that thesis in terms of where we want to focus, as well as what are the areas that these, as we talked about, founders really lack and why, when they fail. It's not just because they didn't know how to scale. They just didn't know what they didn't know. And one of the biggest ones is telling their story. They don't understand what is the right story to tell to investors. And the second is determine commercial viability. So they don't understand what it is. So they think they figured out the biology, it's done. It's not. We have to figure out what the product is. And through that whole product, which is a whole downstream processing, is very, very important and critical. Where your feedstock is coming from, that whole supply chain, full cost analysis to get to. And And it's not just you're able to do this, are there other competitive methods that actually can deliver this as well? So you can't just look at it and say, hey, I'm able to do this, but what's the traditional method and what's the cost of that? What's your method? What's the cost of it? And are there other alternative methods that's non-biological based that also can come to this point, and what's their cost? So understanding commercial viability, what defines a commercial viability, just because the biology works doesn't mean that you necessarily have a product. That's something that a lot of the scientists didn't understand and just get excited by the science. The other thing is the way that a startup company needs to work from it, especially if you're looking for investors, the velocity investors are going to require versus doing scientific research when you're getting grants and you don't have to deliver anything. Investors require very concrete milestones. And if you delay on that, a lot of companies die because they run out of cash, not because they have a bad idea. Managing cash, when we talked about being a business leader, is really, really important. As I work with these founders over time to discover the key areas that they need help on, and that's where it helped us to also refine both the programmatic elements that we offer in BioWell, but also the board that we construct to help these companies, the type of advice and experts that we help to engage with these founders to make sure that they understand how to address that.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's something that we see very acutely when we work with startups or talk to them. We also work in the world of biopharma. So there's a lot of scientists there that are trying to make a deal with big pharma. And this one particular founder scientist, genius, is banging his head against the wall. He's like, they don't get it. These investors aren't getting it. I'm like, because you're speaking to them in biology, you got to speak to them in money. How do you speak the language of money? Because that's what they understand. So rather than that molecules moving around, how does the money move around? Hopefully that got to him, but I'm going to see him pitch again.
Yeah, very simple question. What's the exit? They're looking at making money because the investors don't invest if it doesn't make money for them.
Yeah.
Exactly to your point, and they need to understand. And I come from an academic family. My grandfather is a professor, my dad's a professor, so I totally understand how they think. It's like, oh, the science is such great science, but business is completely different, and it moves at a different cadence as well. Science papers take a long time, get peer reviewed and all of that. In business, we have to get a product out and talk to customers, determine whether there is someone who actually wants it. In science, build something novel, I'm just going to publish it. But that's the end product. That's it. I don't care if people actually want to read it. I'm just going to publish it. But in business, you have to have a product that people actually want to buy.
Yeah. And the whole world isn't you reading your paper. So that's another thing,
Exactly.
But the New York Times isn't going to pick it up and announce it to the world that you publish this paper. So, but it's hard, but it's wonderful that you've set up this ecosystem for nurturing and investment and collaboration with industry, which is so important. Biomanufacturing is vast. It hits different industries. BioWell helps startups. Are there any types of startups that are on top of your mind that you're looking for BioWell? Any industry or any problems out there you're looking for solutions for? Out of curiosity, if anything, I'm sure you'd accept new ideas, but curious if there's anything on top of your mind.
Yeah, right now, I would say First Bight is more focused because this is where the difference between, I would say, call a distinction between BioWell and First Bight, because BioWell is a nonprofit accelerator. So in some ways, BioWell is willing to take a little more risk, get in a little earlier. Whereas First Bight, we have a 10-year fund. This is something I also try to drill into a lot of the founders. So that means I'm looking for an exit in 6 to 8 years. So when I invest, it has to be, I feel like you can commercialize this product in the next 3 to 5 years, and I can exit in 6 to 8 years. From that perspective, I would say First Bight, we look really focused on dropping chemicals. So when you look at our portfolio, we've invested in Genesis, which is a biodegradable microplastic-free polyurethane. We invested in iMicrobe, which uses ethanol and bio-based acrylic. We've invested in the Solus, which has a biopathway to multiple molecules because they have a platform molecule that gets to terpene, solvent, and even SAF in the end. But these are all existing dropping chemicals, I call it molecules, that we know has a market. We know exactly who produces them. We know what application is. We know what the spec is. We know what the petroleum-based cost is. So we understand what cost you need to drive to be competitive in that market. So even though you're bio, but here's the cost marker that you have to hit or be close enough to it that we feel like you have a viable market. But what is nice about that is we do novel product actually requires a much more different process and more significant downstream, even application go to market to educate consumers why this is better. We don't do that. We just focus on dropping chemicals that we know has a market. So we take more engineering risk at First Bight. We don't take scientific risk. So we do need to see solid data, but we're willing to take some engineering risk to assess whether we think you can scale, and we would work with you to find experts to help you scale your technology. That's the risk we're willing to take, but we're not willing to take product market risk, which is very different from traditional venture in software. They take a lot of product market risk. I would say that's one of the fundamental different. Whereas BioWell, I think we're a little bit more open because we're in the process of securing a facility that has 13,000 liters of fermentation capability. So we really are willing to work with a much broader set of biomanufacturing startups in terms of scaling up their manufacturing and helping the labs and also downstream capabilities to help them to get to product or sample, get to those processes done. In BioWell, that facility is more of a service. If you think about it, we're willing to help much broader set of companies who are doing maybe other innovations, and could be companies doing materials and other things that we are happy to help them to scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just love hearing the differences, and I think that'll be really helpful for the audience. I put this question in here about your October event. If you want to talk about that, can you share some details on what you're putting together, and if people are going to be attending, how does it capture the spirit of innovation at BioWell and what First Bight is trying to do?
Yeah, so the event that we're thinking of putting together this fall is we want it to be very focused on commercialization and building the foundation and ecosystem around helping companies to commercialize. So one of the things we said we will not be is an academic. So it's not going to be a place to show off technology. It's going to be really focused on startups, but also capital providers and corporates, because that is the foundation, we believe, the ecosystem and the resources that's needed to help successful commercialization. So we want to make this a really great networking event and make people understand the different resources that they could access, both the startups, but also the corporate, to understand the innovation, and the startups to understand the resources that corporate could offer. And we want to showcase what is possible today in terms of products and applications that these startups are already working on. We want to be able to provide different type of capital providers, because this is an industry that shouldn't be just venture capital. And so we want non-dilutive, so federal government, we want real estate investors, we want project finance investors, we want to bring those type of investors to come to this event to understand biomanufacturing and meet companies and see opportunities. And we want corporates who are maybe user companies and like Goodyear, right? And then we want manufacturers like BSF, all coming to understand the innovation better and explore how they can help. But also, there are a lot of service providers here, especially in Texas, right? We have a lot of chemical engineers, so Coke Modular, they're very good at extraction. They can help. We have a lot of third-party service providers who can help, especially on the DSP side, for these companies to scale. So we want to bring all of that together, really focused on the theme of commercialization, not on scientific innovation, but really commercialization and building that ecosystem, and have that as a foundation that they can take back when they leave this event, is that they now have made connections to help them think about how they can scale their company.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing event. And just like Biowell, just like First Bight, it's very thoughtful. You thought of everything that would be required or necessary for a company to thrive in this biomanufacturing space. And it's been great. I've been so insightful. But as we round this interview out or this conversation out, what is the one piece of advice that you would offer a startup, a founder in this world of biomanufacturing to be successful in it?
The biggest thing I say a lot is technology alone doesn't make a company. And the best technology will not win. Right? So I'll use the example all the time because everybody knows it. It dates me a little bit, Betamax versus VHS. And everybody uses that as an example. And if you think about, I know I joke about it, but I can say that because I worked for Apple. Microsoft doesn't have the best technology, but every corporate in this world uses it. So marketing and operations, there's lots of things. And Microsoft's probably top 5 most valuable company now in the world. So technology alone will not win. If you think you have a great technology, that is so far from being successful. There's so much more that they need to learn. So don't pitch your technology. If you don't know it, definitely come to us and we're happy to tell you all the things that you don't know. You need to learn all those things if you really want to build a successful company.
That's amazing advice. It's absolutely necessary. I mean, it's incredible what you guys are doing. As I mentioned, I think if I were ever to start a company, I'd be coming to you. You've had this experience. You saw the success of other industries, the challenges, and you're bringing it to biomanufacturing. So we really want to thank you too, because we're beating this drum. We've met you recently, and we know that we'll be interacting with you many more times in the future, in the coming years. So just wanted to thank you again, and we look forward to seeing the success of Biowell, seeing the success of your portfolio companies, and being a part of this journey with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it and appreciate what you're trying to do as well, because this industry needs, I think we said, a lot of storytelling. So, and I heard your last podcast and it was the same message. Everybody realized how important storytelling is and making people understand the simplicity. And one of the things I learned from Apple is the simplicity is better than complexity, actually. If you can tell a simple story that people can understand, it's better than explaining how complex your technology is.
Absolutely.
Totally. Thank you so much, Veronica. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Erum, what did you think of Veronica, the Biowell, and First Bight? I thought that was a great interview.
She's the perfect person to be doing what she's doing. I mean, her experience, she worked at McKinsey, Motorola, Apple, Tesla. She has such a strong pedigree of experience. And those companies that she worked at have these amazing process engineering approaches to scale up. And she's bringing that to our industry of biomanufacturing, biotechnology. And that's refreshing. Not only that, but she also looked at where to locate First Bight and Biowell. It sounds like she did all this analysis and figured that Houston was a perfect place considering all the resources she mentioned in the episode. That's amazing. She's like, all right, Houston's a place to be when it comes to scaling up biomanufacturing, taking innovation out of the lab into industry. And we need all the right people and partners in place. And Houston's a place to go. So incredible interview. I can't wait to talk to her more.
Yeah, I agree. Just having that population of chemical and petrochemical engineers. I mean, we talked to Moji of Semvita, who also happens to be in the Houston area. What I like most about that idea is if you're a company that's looking to scale and you need a scale-up facility, they have one, they're bringing one online. And I would imagine after you've tested scaling or you're ready to go straight to something that's bigger than that scale-up facility, that could be a nice intermediary to get your product scaled. And then you might move to some place where feedstock is more abundant or cheaper. But I think what Veronica and her team are doing is superb. One of the things that really stood out to me in the podcast is when she was talking about how do we train scientists to become business leaders? How do we teach founders to learn the part of business, which goes back to what you were saying at the top of the podcast, talking about Merck Digital Sciences and helping innovators understand how to interact with big companies. Because it's not just, hey, you talk to one person and you're going to cut a deal. You have to go in there with a portfolio. You have to go in there with a story that is going to fit into the methodology of the company that you're targeting.
Yep. And Veronica mentioned that too. It's not just the technology, it's the story, it's the business, and that's how they support their founders and companies. I just love the fact that they are laser focused on synbio and biomanufacturing. That helps really bring in the right resources, not just the capital, which they provide that as well, but they provide a space that has the materials required. We just had that episode with Massimo Portancaso to bring that industrial scale up thinking, that downstream processing into the upstream is what Veronica is also promoting. Veronica and the team at BioWell and First Bight saying, hey, look, we need innovation to be thought of on the large scale when it comes to biomanufacturing, and it has to happen from day one, not on year 3. So they're walking their talk. They're bringing people together. They're bringing industry to innovation, bringing the downstream to the upstream. It's just such a match made in heaven, right? We talked to Veronica outside of the podcast, and we can talk to her for hours, and we're late for our next meeting. We're like, we don't care because we talked to Veronica and she's a wealth of information. It's just so easy when you have a hive mind to be able to talk to her and her team. And we can't wait to talk to them more and see what we could do together. They have some events in the works that we want to help support. I know that when we have events and activities, they'd be open to supporting us. And it's great that we're all coming together to really build out this industry.
Yeah, and I think the last thing I would say about the interview and talking to Veronica is just this reminder that the real power in the bioeconomy isn't necessarily invention. And Veronica even said technology alone doesn't make a company. Really, the power in the bioeconomy is orchestration. It's really being able to put together these ecosystems. It's like taking these inventions, orchestrating the ecosystems, coordinating with multiple players, whether it's that scale-up facility, the regulators, the big companies that you want to partner with, and really integrating into these value chains. The science is where things all start, but being able to integrate in the market, build those ecosystems, build those value chains, that's incredibly important. And we're really glad that Veronica is a part of that and that we can help with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So stay tuned. We have the information for BioWell and First Bight in the show notes. Keep track of them, follow them. They have an event that's coming up in October that might be a perfect event for you. That'll be bringing the ecosystem together, but I'm sure they have a lot more activities underway this year. So follow them. We'll keep you posted on First Bight and BioWell. And of course, we have some amazing episodes to continue down this path of biomanufacturing and all the exciting things that are happening in the world of biotechnology. So thanks for listening. Get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. Any guest recommendations, any questions, any new innovations you want us to dig into and think about, criticize, align with. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot out there. But we just love hearing from you. So thank you so much. Stay tuned for the next episode. And Karl, is that the pod?
Yeah, that's the pod. Thank you so much.